Welcome to Roll Credits, where movie lovers get the trivia they didn't know they needed. This podcast was created with help from AI tools, so double-check any quotes before you drop trivia at your next movie night. Today, we're diving into Cobra Kai. Did you know the show was originally pitched as a story told from Johnny Lawrence's perspective, completely flipping the original underdog narrative? And before we get into it, drop a comment and let us know what movie or show we should cover next, old or new. Because today, we're looking at a deep dive into a show that, it basically proved failure can actually be the greatest business model in Hollywood.
Oh, for sure.
Like Cobra Kai didn't just survive the catastrophic collapse of a tech giant streaming network. It completely weaponized our 1980s nostalgia to just dominate the global cultural conversation.
Weaponizing nostalgia is definitely one way to frame it. But, if you look at the raw mechanics of how this show was birthed, it was less about just cashing in on a recognizable brand and more of a really daring structural experiment.
A structural experiment.
Like
How so?
Well, the creators, Josh Heel, John Hurwitz, and Hayden Schlossberg, they walked into these pitch meetings with a concept they just bluntly titled Bad Sensei.
Bad Sensei. I love that.
Right. And the audacious part of their pitch was this claim that the narrative engine could run perfectly even if the Karate Kid universe never existed.
Wait, really? Without any of the, Miyagi lore?
Exactly. You strip away the iconic headbands, the crane kicks, the whole legendary 1984 tournament, and you're still left with this fundamentally compelling character study.
Just a broken guy trying to figure his life out.
Yeah, a deeply flawed, middle-aged man who's just drowning in his own psychological baggage, and he's attempting to exorcise his demons by teaching martial arts to a bunch of marginalized teenagers.
That pitch strategy is fascinating to me because it forces the studio executives to judge the actual skeleton of the story, right? Rather than just relying on the franchise skin.
Right. It proves the concept has actual structural integrity.
But, having a good skeleton doesn't guarantee you get the original actors back to put meat on those bones. The legacy actors, especially William Zabka and Ralph Macchio, they were intensely protective of their characters.
Oh, incredibly protective.
Because they spent decades trying to escape the shadow of those specific roles. Like, Macchio had built an entire career trying to distance himself from Daniel LaRusso.
And Zabka had been pigeonholed as, the quintessential 80s movie bully for 30 years.
Exactly. So convincing them wasn't just a matter of sliding a lucrative contract across a boardroom table.
Far from it, yeah. It required this extended, really delicate campaign of trust building. The actors needed absolute certainty that the creators weren't bringing these characters back just to turn them into punchlines for a modern, cynical audience.
Nobody wants to be a joke.
Right. They demanded to be protectors of the franchise's legacy. But what's genuinely wild about this entire endeavor is where they ultimately decided to plant their flag initially.
Oh, yes. The platform choice.
Yeah, we tend to think of Cobra Kai as this massive Netflix titan, but its origin story is tied to one of the most intriguing missteps in the modern streaming wars, which is YouTube Red.
I always love dissecting the YouTube Red era. It is such a strange footnote in tech history.
It really is.
Because YouTube, obviously flush with Google's unimaginable wealth, they decided they wanted a seat at the prestige television table. They wanted to be up there with HBO, Netflix, Hulu.
Right, they wanted those Emmy-tier shows.
So they poured staggering amounts of capital into original scripted content, and they locked it behind this premium paywall. And almost all of it just evaporated into thin air.
Poof.
Gone.
Entire slates of shows starring major internet personalities, even Hollywood actors, they failed to leave even a ripple in the cultural zeitgeist.
But then you have Cobra Kai.
Exactly. Floating in the wreckage of that failed platform was Cobra Kai. It was universally praised by critics right out of the gate in 2018, but it was trapped in an ecosystem nobody wanted to pay for. It's like opening a world-class dojo in a deserted strip mall. That's a great analogy. But, the platform's failure was actually the crucible that forged the show's ultimate success.
What do you mean?
Well, think about the economics of streaming acquisitions. If YouTube Red had been mildly successful, Cobra Kai would have been locked in their proprietary walled garden indefinitely.
Oh. Serving a fraction of the audience.
Exactly. But because YouTube completely abandoned scripted originals, the show was left stranded, which allowed Sony to shop it around. So when Netflix finally acquired the rights and dropped the show in 2020, they weren't just premiering a new series.
They were rescuing a fully formed, critically acclaimed hidden treasure.
Yes, and bringing it to the biggest stage possible, like the All-Valley tournament of streaming.
And the timing of that rescue mission created this wild distribution anomaly. There was a staggering 2-year hiatus between the production of Season 2 and the premiere of Season 3.
2 whole years!
Which, in the ruthless attention economy of the streaming era, a 2-year gap is typically a death sentence.
Oh, audiences are incredibly fickle. They move on to the next algorithmically suggested binge within weeks.
Right. But for Cobra Kai, the delay acted as a pressure cooker, because Season 2 ended on that horrific, unresolved cliffhanger.
The school fight.
Yes, and that cavernous gap in time gave the internet space to do what it does best, right?
Yeah.
Generate sprawling conspiracy theories, analyze every single frame, and just build this fever pitch of anticipation.
It inadvertently replicated the old-school television model of event viewing. By the time Season 3 was ready, Netflix had primed the pump by releasing the first 2 seasons to their colossal global subscriber base.
So the audience demand wasn't merely sustained, it was exponentially amplified.
Exactly. They engineered an organic cultural phenomenon out of a scheduling delay. And once the audience arrived, they stayed. Mostly because of the profound psychological reframing of the Valley's philosophy, starting with the complete deconstruction of Johnny Lawrence.
Let's dissect the mechanics of Zabka's performance there, because it is a masterclass in layered character acting.
It really is.
The writers took a character who was functionally a one-dimensional, blonde-haired avatar for 1980s aggression, and they injected him with this heavy dose of working-class reality.
And the brilliance is that they don't retcon his past. They just provide missing context.
Right. The show forces you to realize Johnny was just an impressionable kid who happened to have a severely abusive mentor.
Yeah, and Zabka plays Johnny with this tragic, almost out-of-time physicality. Like, he drinks Coors Banquet, listens to cassette tapes of hair metal, he drives a dilapidated Firebird.
But the humor doesn't come from mocking him, right?
No, not at all. It comes from the friction between his unfiltered, entirely politically incorrect worldview and the sensitivities of the modern world. Beneath all that bluster, Zabka shows us these tiny micro-expressions of a man desperately terrified of failing another generation.
The mirror image of that fear is found in Daniel LaRusso. And the creators took a tremendous risk by intentionally tarnishing the golden boy of the franchise.
Oh, huge risk.
Because in the timeline of the universe, Mr. Miyagi passed away in 2011. Without his anchor, Daniel is utterly adrift.
The creators actually describe him as rudderless, which I think is a perfect nautical metaphor for a man who has wealth, a thriving car dealership empire, a pristine family life, yet is fundamentally lost.
The show makes a really provocative argument there. It suggests that holding on to a grudge from a high school karate tournament for 30 years is a sign of arrested development, regardless of how many luxury cars you own.
Right. It completely disrupts your ingrained loyalty as a viewer. You catch yourself actively rooting against the ultimate underdog hero of your childhood.
Because Daniel frequently weaponizes his wealth and his civic influence to systematically sabotage Johnny's attempts to climb out of poverty and rebuild his dojo.
He essentially becomes the villain of Johnny's redemption story.
He really does. And speaking of villains, the show performs absolute narrative alchemy with Martin Kove's character, John Kreese.
Oh, the flashbacks.
Yes. They take a guy who was essentially a cigar-chomping, cartoonish sadist in the original films and elevate him into a deeply tragic, complex figure.
The alchemy really is in those flashbacks. We are transported back to Kreese's time as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And the audience learns that his martial arts foundation isn't just a sport, it was a mechanism for literal survival.
Taught to him by that elite captain who instilled a rigid binary worldview.
Exactly. Because in a war zone, showing mercy to an enemy doesn't mean you lose a point in a tournament. It means your entire squad is executed.
The manifestation of that trauma is so visceral. Like the scene where Kreese is forced by his captors to fight his commanding officer over a literal pit of venomous snakes.
Chilling, just chilling.
To survive the encounter, Kreese has to embrace the absolute darkest part of human nature and drop his mentor into the pit. It is the horrific genesis of the strike first, no mercy doctrine.
And, you don't forgive Kreese for the monster he becomes, but you suddenly understand the twisted architecture of his mind. He genuinely believes society is a battlefield.
Right.
And by teaching these kids to be ruthless, he thinks he is giving them the armor they need to survive a world that he views as inherently lethal.
When you look at these warring philosophies, you start to see that the show isn't just referencing 1980s pop culture, is it? It's engaging in a sophisticated literary dialogue.
Yeah, the underlying structure of the competing dojos maps perfectly onto William Golding's Lord of the Flies.
Oh, wow. Break that down for me.
Okay, so if you look at the archetypes, Daniel and his daughter Sam are the equivalent of Ralph. They represent an attempt at civilization, rules, and well-intentioned leadership, but they are often indecisive and paralyzed by their own moral codes.
That tracks perfectly.
Then you have Johnny and his star pupil, Miguel. They embody Jack, the aggressive, action-oriented survivalists who get things done but flirt dangerously with chaos.
And Creasy.
Kreese and the character Hawk, they fall into the archetype of Roger. It's the terrifying descent into pure, unadulterated sadism and the thrill of violence for violence's sake.
Taking that literary analysis a step further, does this imply the show is actively critiquing the philosophy of Mr. Miyagi himself? Because throughout the series, Daniel repeatedly tries to apply Miyagi's strictly defensive, passive teachings to the incredibly complex, often cruel social dynamics of modern teenagers.
And it frequently results in disaster.
Exactly. Daniel's students get cornered and hurt because they refuse to strike back.
The showrunners have explicitly discussed this tension. They refer to it as the Miyagi paradox.
A Miyagi paradox.
Right. It isn't a teardown of Miyagi, but it's an exploration of how extreme pacifism can become a severe vulnerability in a world that operates on predatory logic. The series dares to suggest that a calculated amount of aggression, when harnessed and directed responsibly, is a necessary developmental tool.
That makes sense. Look at Johnny's initial students. They are marginalized, severely bullied outcasts. They don't need a lecture on inner peace.
No, they need the immediate physical confidence to assert their right to exist in the school hallways. The thesis of the show is that blind adherence to Miyagi's absolute passivity leaves you a victim, just as blind adherence to Kreese's absolute aggression makes you a predator.
The elusive goal is finding the philosophical middle ground.
Precisely.
But exploring the Miyagi paradox in a vacuum doesn't work. Philosophy needs a testing ground, and Johnny and Daniel's testing ground is the next generation.
They are totally projecting their unresolved 1984 trauma onto kids like Miguel Diaz, played by Xolo Maridueña.
And Miguel is the emotional fulcrum of the entire series. His narrative arc is a deliberate step-by-step mirror of Daniel's journey in the original film.
Right, absolutely. He's the new kid from a working-class single-mother household, getting relentlessly targeted by bullies. But the monumental pivot is that instead of finding a perfectly balanced, sagacious mentor,
He gets a functioning alcoholic who is figuring it out as he goes.
Exactly. Miguel's trajectory is a study in operant conditioning. He begins the series as a gentle, empathetic kid, but under Johnny's tutelage, you watch the aggression slowly seep into his baseline personality.
And to sell that physical and psychological transformation, the production required an unprecedented level of dedication from the younger cast. We aren't just watching characters evolve. We are watching the actors themselves undergo a martial arts boot camp over the course of several years.
It's grueling work. Peyton List, who portrays the volatile Tori Nichols, was cast with zero prior martial arts experience.
Zero. Wow.
Zero. And Mary Mouser, playing Samantha LaRusso, she struggled initially too, but was singled out by the stunt coordinators as the most dramatically improved performer on the roster by the end of the second season. They were subjected to relentless daily conditioning.
I read about the casting strategy regarding their physical backgrounds, and it is incredibly clever.
Yeah.
The producers intentionally targeted actors with extensive backgrounds in dance.
Which sounds counterintuitive at first.
Right. On paper, ballet and karate seem diametrically opposed, but the biomechanics are remarkably similar. Dancers already possess elite spatial awareness, rhythm, and the cognitive ability to memorize complex physical choreography rapidly.
When you have a production schedule moving at breakneck television speeds, a dancer can learn a 10-move fight sequence in half the time it takes a traditional actor.
And they also brought in some legitimate pedigree. Tanner Buchanan, who plays Robbie Keane, didn't just learn for the show. His mother is a real-life black belt, and he holds a teal belt himself.
That existing physical vocabulary translates directly into the visceral impact of the scenes. But, physical ownership of the roles is only half the equation. The legacy actors took fierce intellectual ownership over their characters' voices.
Because the foundational lore is so revered.
Exactly. The set operated with a unique dynamic where actors frequently challenged the writing staff. William Zabka wasn't merely requesting dialogue tweaks to make lines roll off the tongue easier. He acted as the gatekeeper for Johnny's worldview.
So if a script called for Johnny to understand a modern cultural reference or react with too much emotional intelligence, Zabka would step in.
He would completely veto it. He'd argue that Johnny's brain simply wouldn't process information that way.
That level of investment must have led to some fascinating behind-the-scenes friction. There is a famous anecdote about how Zopka and Martin Kove were so dissatisfied with the trajectory of a crucial confrontation between Johnny and Kreese in Season 4.
Ah, the weekend rewrite.
Yes, they spent an entire weekend holed up together, completely rewriting the scene from scratch. They walked into production on Monday morning and pitched their newly crafted dialogue to the showrunners.
And what happened?
Well, the writers listened respectfully and acknowledged their passion, but ultimately rejected the actor's draft and shot the scene as originally scripted.
Ouch.
I know. But it highlights the delicate tightrope walk of television production. You have to balance the deep, intuitive knowledge the actors have of their characters with the overarching, multi-season narrative architecture the writers are building.
And navigating that friction requires immense trust, especially when that emotional tension inevitably erupts into physical violence on screen. The action choreography in the series cannot be overstated. It functions as dialogue.
The narrative is advanced through the fights, not paused for them.
Right, and this requires visionary stunt coordination. The foundation was laid by the Emmy-nominated duo Hiro Koda and Jenel Kerfman for the first 3 seasons, before Ken Bearfield and Don Lee took the reins in Season 4 to really escalate the complexity.
To understand their genius, we have to meticulously break down their crowning achievement, which is the Season 2 school brawl.
Oh man, that scene.
This isn't just a fight scene. It is a sprawling 10-minute kinetic masterpiece that serves as the season's climax. They secured an actual fully functioning high school in Atlanta to shoot it.
But because it was a practical location, they were granted a punishingly tight window.
Just 4 days. 4 days to block, light, and capture the entire sequence involving dozens of principal actors and hundreds of background extras.
Logistically, it borders on the impossible. The crown jewel of that sequence is a continuous Steadicam shot, a oneer that runs uninterrupted for roughly 85 seconds.
It's breathtaking.
The camera operator is physically weaving backwards through crowded hallways, panning seamlessly to catch Sam clashing with Tori, sweeping down a corridor to capture Miguel brawling with Robbie, all while perfectly timing the background chaos so that bodies are flying into lockers precisely as the lens passes them.
The technical wizardry required to pull off those continuous shots without injuring the lead actors relies on a camera trick known as a Texas switch.
Let's explain that for the audience.
Yeah, for anyone unfamiliar with the term, it is an optical illusion relying on the psychology of the viewer's eye. Let's say a character is about to be thrown brutally into a row of lockers. As the camera pans quickly to follow the action, an extra or piece of foreground scenery momentarily obscures the actor.
Just for a fraction of a second.
Right. In that tiny window, the lead actor drops to the floor and a highly trained stunt double steps into the exact same spatial footprint to take the bone-crunching impact. Then, as the character recoils from the hit, the camera whips around again, the double rolls out, and the actor pops back up into frame, clutching their shoulder, grimacing.
When executed flawlessly, the human brain registers the entire sequence as one continuous reality. It requires timing down to the millisecond.
And that precision is paramount when the stakes are elevated to dangerous heights. Like the horrific climax of that brawl where Miguel is kicked over a second-story balcony.
To capture the terrifying, visceral reality of that fall, the stunt team essentially fractured the moment into 2 distinct elements.
Right, they rigged Cholo Maridueña to a wire harness and dropped him at 1/3 of normal gravity.
Which allowed the camera to capture his genuine facial expressions of terror and the panicked flailing of his limbs in midair. But the brutal, unforgiving impact of the body slamming into the staircase below was taken by his stuntman, Noah.
It is an extraordinary display of trust between the cast and the stunt professionals, whose literal job is to absorb the pain.
And sometimes, no matter how meticulously you plan these intricate ballets of violence, the universe forces you to improvise.
Like the climax of Season 3.
Exactly. That was originally storyboarded as an epic, moonlit clash set in the serene, spiritual environment of Mr. Miyagi's backyard. But, television production is at the mercy of the elements.
A sweeping, severe November storm system parked itself over Atlanta right as they were scheduled to shoot the finale.
With the clock ticking and the budget training, they couldn't afford to halt production. So, in an act of desperate ingenuity, the crew picked up the entire sequence and relocated it indoors to the soundstage of the LaRusso house set.
That forced pivot fundamentally altered the psychological texture of the fight.
It really did.
By moving the brawl from a spacious open-air garden into the confined architecture of a living room, the choreography became deeply claustrophobic. It transformed a sprawling battle into a suffocating, close-quarters knife fight.
They completely decimated this immaculate, wealthy set design. When Daniel and Kreese finally reach their boiling point, the choreography dictates they smash through a massive floor-to-ceiling plate glass window, tumbling onto the concrete patio.
And in production terms, a glass break is an absolute nightmare.
Oh, the worst. The stuntmen perform the harrowing fall, the makeup team rushes in to apply the fake lacerations and blood, the art department spends an hour sweeping up the shattered sugar glass and installing a fresh pane, and then they have to do it all over again until the director is satisfied.
I constantly compare these sweeping brawl sequences to a live symphony orchestra. You have a multitude of distinct instruments that must play in perfect harmony. The lead actors, the stunt doubles, the background extras, the camera operators mapping their footwork, the focus pullers keeping the lens sharp, the lighting technicians manipulating shadows.
And if one thing goes wrong,
If a single extra throws a punch a half-second too late, or if the Steadicam operator shifts their weight off their mark by a single inch, the entire illusion shatters into a discordant mess. The director has to yell, "Cut!" reset the entire chaotic machinery, and start from the top.
it is a miracle of sustained concentration. And adding to that pressure is Zabka's staggering dedication to realism. He insists on performing roughly 98% of his own stunts.
We are talking about a man in his 50s executing high-level martial arts choreography take after take.
He is so hypercritical of his own biomechanical form on camera that there are instances where he flatly refused to let his stunt double stand in for him, even in wide establishing shots where his face wouldn't even be recognizable.
Seriously, just for a Y shot?
Yeah, he argued that the audience would subconsciously recognize that the posture and gait weren't authentically Johnny Lawrence.
That relentless pursuit of authenticity is the bedrock of the show, but it is matched only by the creator's obsessive reverence for the franchise's dense history. They treat the expanded Karate Kid universe like an intricate sandbox.
Mining this source material for deep-cut Easter eggs that serve as profound emotional rewards for the hardcore fandom.
The Easter eggs are breathtaking in their specificity. Let's examine the resurrection of Terry Silver, the Machiavellian villain from the often maligned Karate Kid Part 3.
Right.
When Silver is finally reintroduced in Cobra Kai, the camera pans to reveal him luxuriating in a steaming hot tub. To a casual viewer, it's just an establishing shot of a wealthy man. But to a legacy fan, it is a frame-for-frame recreation of Silver's very first introduction to the world in the 1989 film.
But they drill down even further into the minutia. Silver's primary henchman in the show, an imposing figure named Dennis de Guzman, is portrayed by William Christopher Ford.
Wait, is that the original actor?
Yes. If you freeze-frame the 1989 movie, Ford is the exact same actor who played the thug who attacked Daniel in Mr. Miyagi's bonsai shop. Tracking down a background actor from 3 decades ago just to populate a henchman role is a level of world-building commitment you rarely see.
It demonstrates that they don't view these legacy characters as mere cameo fodder. They integrate them into the emotional tapestry of the new narrative.
A perfect illustration of this is the pursuit of the character Dutch, the most volatile member of Johnny's original 1984 gang, played by Chad McQueen.
The son of the legendary Steve McQueen.
Right. The showrunners were desperate to complete the reunion, but McQueen was profoundly hesitant to step back onto a set. He had endured severe, life-altering injuries from a career in professional auto racing, had been entirely removed from the acting industry for decades, and felt deeply uncomfortable stepping back into the public eye.
So how did they convince him?
The fact that he eventually agreed to return wasn't about a paycheck. It was a testament to his enduring, decades-long personal bond with William Zabka, coupled with the fact that his own children had become massive fans of the new series. It speaks volumes about the familial, protective atmosphere the production cultivated.
You cannot discuss the emotional texture of this universe without doing a deep dive into the sonic landscape. The musical score is so distinctive it essentially functions as a standalone character.
The composers, Leo Barenberg and Zach Robinson, they made a bold, calculated decision to completely reject the modern trend of dark, brooding, minimalist synth scores.
Instead, they dove headfirst into unapologetic 1980s cinematic cheese.
They bypassed modern digital software and specifically sought out the vintage hardware that defined the era synthesizers, like the Korg M1 and the Roland D50. These are the exact instruments that produce the shimmering, driving, metallic sounds of 80s pop and cinema.
Utilizing the authentic hardware is what gives the score its sonic integrity. Listen closely to the track titled Slither, which underscores one of Miguel's grueling training montages. The reason the sequence transcends mere parody is the absolute sincerity of the composition.
Exactly. A lesser show would have composed a winking, ironic track to make fun of 80s training montages. But Byronberg and Robinson composed a genuine love letter to the genre. They understood that to honor the emotional weight of the narrative, the music had to operate without a shred of cynicism.
Sincerity is the perfect word.
Right.
And when they pivot away from the synthesizers to go full orchestral, the emotional manipulation is masterful. There is a triumphant track called Final Match that plays during a critical tournament sequence.
Oh, I love that track.
To create it, the composers utilized soaring, blaring brass sections, specifically trumpets, and applied a technique called a major key reharmonization to Daniel's classic melancholic theme from the original films.
Explain that technique for the listeners because it's brilliant.
Right, so for those unfamiliar with music theory, a major key reharmonization is a brilliant psychological trick. You take a melody that is originally written in a minor key, which your brain naturally interprets as sad, tense, or unresolved.
Right.
By shifting the underlying chords to major keys, you retain the recognizable melody, but you completely invert the emotional impact, turning it into something overwhelmingly victorious and triumphant. It is a sonic trigger designed to flood the listener's brain with pure, distilled sports movie nostalgia. It makes you feel the exact adrenaline rush you experienced watching the crane kick land in 1984.
That level of meticulous detail extends far beyond the music. The entire production is laced with interconnected trivia that reveals how deeply intertwined the creators' personal lives are with the fictional universe.
Let's unpack some of those behind-the-scenes connections, because they are fascinating case studies in how Hollywood actually operates. For instance, the naming conventions of the characters aren't random. The creators immortalized their own families by naming 3 pivotal characters, Ali, Tori, and Jessica, directly after their own daughters.
That's a great piece of trivia. And speaking of characters, the neurotically verbose Dimitri was completely different in the initial drafts. He was originally conceived as an Indian character named Tanzit.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, the pivot in development highlights how fluid character archetypes are before casting locks them in. And then there is the bizarre reality of celebrity fandom intersecting with production.
You're talking about Carrie Underwood.
Yes, Carrie Underwood, an international country music superstar, is granted a highly publicized extended cameo in season 4 simply because she utilized her massive platform to tweet about being a superfan of the show. It proves that in the modern era, social media engagement can literally write you into a script.
But perhaps the most surprising behind-the-scenes reality involves the legal architecture of the franchise. Viewers often spot Will Smith's name lingering in the executive producer credits and assume it's an honorary title or a vanity credit.
But it's not. The reality is rooted in hard intellectual property law. Smith's production company, Overbrook Entertainment, acquired the underlying rights to the entire Karate Kid franchise when they produced the 2010 reboot starring his son, Jaden Smith, and Jackie Chan.
So without Overbrook's legal blessing and participation, Cobra Kai legally cannot exist.
Exactly. It is a stark reminder of the corporate machinery behind the art.
But on a much warmer note, the production also embraced nepotism in the best possible way by turning the set into a family affair. Ralph Macchio's real-life daughter was cast to play the sister of his on-screen cousin Louis.
And even more amusing, Macchio's real-life son, whose actual legal name is Daniel, makes a blink-and-you-miss-it appearance in a season 3 courtroom scene.
The lineage connections even cross over into other Hollywood dynasties. Robin Lively, the actress who portrayed Daniel's platonic friend Jessica Andrews in Karate Kid Part 3 and makes a triumphant return in the series, is the older sister of A-list actress Blake Lively.
That's a fun connection. Yet, amidst all the industry connections and legal maneuvering, my favorite detail remains the quietest and most poignant.
The necklace.
Yes. Throughout the series, the audience catches glimpses of a delicate necklace kept hidden by Mr. Miyagi. The prop department didn't just invent a trinket. The lore dictates that this necklace originally belonged to Miyagi's late wife, Lucille, whose tragic death in an internment camp during World War II forms the agonizing emotional core of his character.
In a profound narrative choice, it is ultimately Daniel's daughter, Sam, who returns the heirloom to Okinawa. It is a subtle, beautiful piece of writing that brings Miyagi's lifelong journey of grief to a peaceful, full-circle resolution.
It really is beautiful. However, any television property that commands this level of obsessive global attention is inevitably going to be subjected to intense granular scrutiny.
Oh yeah, the internet misses nothing.
And Cobra Kai certainly has a vocal contingent of critics who love to dissect its continuity flaws and deviations from reality. Let's start with the most obvious target, the martial arts themselves.
The critiques from actual martial arts practitioners are entirely valid, and they point to a fascinating divergence between cinematic tradition and historical accuracy.
The central irony of the show is that the original Cobra Kai dojo, despite existing in a franchise literally titled The Karate Kid, does not actually teach Japanese karate.
Because of Kreese's background.
Right. The lore establishes that Kreese learned his lethal striking techniques while stationed in Korea, meaning the foundational style of the villainous dojo is actually Tang Sudo.
Furthermore, the weaponry featured in the series often sacrifices historical authenticity for sheer visual spectacle. When the teenagers engage in armed combat, they are frequently seen wielding nunchaku constructed with black handles linked by metal chains.
Which is very Bruce Lee.
Exactly. This specific design is an iconic visual invention popularized by Bruce Lee in 1970s Chinese kung fu cinema. Authentic Okinawan kabuto nunchaku, which would historically accompany traditional karate, are vastly different, typically consisting of plain, unpainted wood connected by a simple utilitarian rope.
Moreover, the actual fight choreography we see on screen heavily integrates flashy acrobatic kicks and modern grappling submissions that would result in immediate disqualification in a rigid 1980s point-based traditional karate tournament.
The purists watch those sequences and pull their hair out. But as a viewer, you have to admit the acrobatic hybrid style looks spectacular on a high-definition screen.
It's fantastic television.
But if we are discussing the show's relationship with reality, the martial arts inaccuracies pale in comparison to the show's staggering biological leaps of faith.
No, the healing factor.
Yes, the audience is required to accept an almost superhuman healing factor for the entire cast. We are witnessing high school students bludgeon each other with blunt instruments, shatter plate glass windows with their spines, and plummet down concrete staircases on a weekly basis.
Yet, miraculously, they arrive at first period algebra the following Monday, sporting nothing more severe than a picturesque bruise and a small bandage over their eyebrow.
The absolute zenith of this medical absurdity is Miguel's trajectory following the school brawl. He sustains a catastrophic, highly complex spinal trauma and injury that leaves him comatose and fully paralyzed from the waist down.
In the real world, recovery from that level of neurological damage, if possible at all, requires years of grueling, agonizing physical therapy.
In the universe of the show, Miguel is fully rehabilitated, back on the mat, and throwing spinning heel kicks in a matter of mere months, just in time to qualify for the next tournament arc.
The sheer audacity of that accelerated healing timeline is precisely what birthed one of the internet's most enduring and elaborate conspiracy theories.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
The theory attempts to reconcile the show's logistical impossibilities through a dark psychological lens. Because the physical recovery times defy medical science, because awkward teenagers transform into elite, black belt level weapons in a matter of weeks, and because the adult authority figures in the police force, the school administrators, the teachers are portrayed as cartoonishly inept and entirely absent during massive riots, a vocal subset of fans argues that the camera itself is an unreliable narrator.
The Miguel coma theory.
Exactly. The theory posits that everything the audience witnesses from the tragic conclusion of Season 2 onwards is not actually happening in the physical world. Rather, it is a hyper-vivid, extended hallucination taking place entirely within the confines of Miguel's comatose brain.
It is a brilliant piece of internet folklore. The framework suggests that Miguel is lying unresponsive in an ICU bed, and the sprawling narrative we are consuming is actually his subconscious desperately trying to process his trauma.
The reality we see is a schizophrenic blend of his deepest wish fulfillment, miraculously regaining the use of his legs, winning the affection of the girl, and conquering his bullies, violently clashing with his darkest, most paralyzing nightmares, where his beloved sensei loses control, Kreese infects the minds of his friends, and the violence escalates to apocalyptic levels.
It is a remarkably elegant thought experiment, because it retroactively patches every single plot hole. The incompetence of the police isn't bad writing. It's the logic of a dream state where authority figures never intervene. The sudden mastery of complex martial arts isn't unrealistic pacing. It's the boundless capability of an unconstrained imagination.
It's very seductive.
I understand why it is, but I have to fundamentally dismantle it. I don't buy the coma narrative for a second, and here's why. Using a coma to explain away continuity errors is an intellectual cop-out that ignores the brutal realities of modern television production.
Okay, lay it on me.
The creators aren't writing a medical documentary. They are engineering high-stakes, long-form operatic drama for a demographic with an increasingly fractured attention span. If the writers anchored the narrative in strict biological reality, Season 3 would consist of 10 agonizing hours of Miguel struggling to lift a 2-pound weight in a sterile physical therapy clinic while Johnny fills out insurance paperwork.
The audience would completely evaporate.
Exactly. The impossible healing timelines, the lack of police intervention, the spectacular physics-defying brawls that is the required currency you pay to enter this universe. The audience willingly suspends their disbelief regarding the logistics because the show delivers absolute, uncompromising authenticity when it comes to the emotional truth of the characters. We don't care that Miguel's spine healed too fast. We care that he found the emotional strength to stand up.
That distinction between logistical reality and emotional truth is the key to understanding the show's enduring power. You accept the heightened, almost mythological reality of the valley because the emotional stakes feel profoundly real. And if we zoom out to look at the sweeping narrative architecture of the entire series, it leaves us confronting a deeply unsettling philosophical question as the saga marches toward its inevitable conclusion.
What's that?
Strip away the tournaments and the rivalries, and the core premise of Cobra Kai is a tragedy. It is the story of two deeply scarred, middle-aged men, Johnny and Daniel, who have spent the better part of a decade actively passing their own unresolved, festering teenage trauma down to a highly impressionable, vulnerable new generation.
Oh, that is a dark thread to pull.
It demands exploration. What happens to this ecosystem when these teenagers finally reach adulthood? Have Johnny and Daniel truly broken the cycle, or have they merely reset the clock? It forces you to wonder if Miguel, Sam, Tori, and Robbie are destined to wake up in their 50s, burdened by the immense psychological scars inflicted upon them by their mentors, feeling compelled to open their own competing dojos just to process the damage. Are we watching a story of redemption, or are we witnessing the San Fernando Valley become permanently trapped in an inescapable generational loop of martial arts warfare, where the pain of the past is simply repackaged and handed down to the future forever?
Are they just creating the next generation of bad senseis? That is a haunting concept that completely shifts how you view the legacy of these characters. And that wraps our deep dive into Cobra Kai. If you enjoyed revisiting this world of rivalries and redemption, follow Roll Credits and share it with your fellow fans. And don't forget to drop a comment with what movie or show we should cover next, old or new. We'll be back soon with more trivia, more movie magic, and maybe a few more rematches.